All right, good afternoon. My name is Connor Murdoch, and I'm a first-year MBA here at MIT Sloan, and I'm also the co-lead of the Modern Sports Finance panel. Today we're joined, from left to right, by Joe McNulty, who's a CPA and Managing Director of the McNulty Group, Jeff Jordan, who's a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, George Pine, who's the founder and CEO of Bruin Sports Capital, Randy Campbell, who's the Executive Director and Head of Sports Facility Finance at Morgan Stanley, and Alex Sugarman, who's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Development with the Chicago Cubs. The panel will be moderated by Eric Chimmy, who's a Senior Editor-at-Large with CNBC. The panel will run, just like the others, for 45 minutes. We followed up by 15 minutes of Q&A, and we'll ask you to navigate to the Twitter function within the app to submit a question via tweet, and we'll select the most popular, liked, favorited, retweeted tweets, questions that Eric will then ask. With that, take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Connor. I'll start with Jeff right away. Why do you think sports is a bad investment?
Sports is a bad investment. I'd probably caveat that with...
No caveat, just your actual
sports
opinion.
Technology.
From a guy who's made zero investments in sports.
One investment in sports, a fine company called Fanatics.com that sells licensed apparel online. They power the NFL shop. They power the NBA store. So we're very happy with that large investment that's there. What I was talking to Eric about is I see a lot of new companies looking to develop new sports technologies. And we're technology investors at Andreessen Horowitz. And we haven't pulled the trigger on any of the new technologies. And there are a couple reasons. There's some fascinating stuff out there. And I'm a sports nut. So, I mean, it's a personal passion. The challenge usually comes in around market size. A lot of things, ideally, they say, these will help the pro teams so much. And there are only a few pro teams, and almost all the budget of pro teams go to salaries for the players. So if you're relying on the non-salary budget of pro teams, it's probably not going to be a big business. Then some say, okay, well, we won't do the pro teams, we'll do the broadcasters. And there are a couple decent-sized companies that sell products to broadcasters. That First Down line in football was a technology company. So, it's a pretty good company, but it's not a huge venture return. And then they kind of say, okay, if we can't sell to the leagues and we can't sell to the teams, can we sell to amateur athletics at large? And then you've got a distribution strategy. How do you do that? I mean, that's a bigger market, but how do you get it there? So we haven't found the right combination of magical technology and a go-to-market strategy that made us excited, which is why that observation is a fair one.
But then, George, your business is all about sports and media and entertainment investing. So how can you see it so differently than Jeff?
Well, I think a couple things. And he's talking about a certain segment. I think I came from IMG. Forsman Little was a private equity firm. They had an incredible return on their investments. So I think that proves itself there. And it's interesting, Silver Lake is a technology investor, and they did buy WME IMG, and obviously they saw something there that was related to technology. And you have other sophisticated investors, Providence Equity, TPG. So I think, it's a good market. I do agree, though, you do get constrained when you look at the products if it's required to a league or a team. And when I look at more technology applications, I think you have to look into things that tap into the passion of the fan and the engagement of the fan and not be limited by a team, league, or broadcaster, because that is very limiting. And so it's funny that you say that, because while I'm not a tech expert, we do have a tech fund with a lot of experts, and I'm kind of the sports guy there. And my thesis was we can't be limited to things that constrain you by governing bodies or leagues. It has to be something that taps into the passion and fan engagement that's unique to sports.
And that brings me to Alex. At the Cubs, there's obviously the Cubs as a team, but now there's all these other investments outside of it. Real estate, and we look at some of the current deals that other teams have done with condos and shopping centers, all this kind of stuff. At what point does owning a team not be about owning a team? At what point are you just investing in some sort of real estate conglomerate that has a bunch of stuff, one of which is a sports team?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the team that you're talking about and the platform that you built, right? At the core, a sports team is a brand and a content producer, content creator. And so how can you sort of find ways to distribute and monetize that content? It starts a traditional sports approach to that is selling tickets and selling your broadcast rights. But over time, how can you, to George's point, how do you sort of tap into that consumer loyalty and find other ways to sort of express your brand and to try and sort of capture wallet share if it's either sort of in your local sort of community with a real estate investment or finding ways and distribution channels to take your content to your fans outside your community.
That brings me to our CPA in the building, Joe. Are these even good investments? Is this just like art? Is it a vanity project? I mean, is anyone making money for the most part?
Well, my
on
job
teams?
is to make it good, okay? And using tax incentives until the such time the team turns around to use the tax benefits from a franchise, you know, to give the return on the investors in the early time. You know, I've been doing this 16 years now, and I've seen every team I've dealt with. I've seen pain. I've seen grown men cry, and then doing some investments. But on the whole, I've seen people make substantial amount of money in the sports franchise business.
But you talk about tax policy, tax incentives, and I know people didn't come here to listen about taxes, but they're actually really important when it comes to doing these deals because the difference a lot of the times in making a profit or not making a profit in an investment just comes down to what the tax treatment is. So talk about this PSL thing you've got going on, trying to figure out how to get it tax-free.
Well, what we've been dealing with is some of the people are looking at financing, you know, financing stadiums, they're looking at PSLs and selling PSLs. PSLs, when they're sold as ordinary income to the team, and is subject to some states, almost up to 53% of the income. So we're working on, you know, as accountants, and it's very easy to think it's all about what the credit is. So we're looking at other possibilities of treating, such as they've done in some European soccer clubs, is bringing in the license holder as, you know, in a master limited partnership that would invest in the land or the stadium, and it would be tax-free because it'd be a contribution of capital and not revenue, and you get substantially a lot more of the money in the pocket to be able to do the financing of the stadium.
So where do you draw that line, though, between what's a fun project? Because I want to own a team. If I'm a typical billionaire and I have just some extra money to burn and I want to be cool and I want to have a team, but then I got to talk to you to worry about taxes and trying to do it right. I mean, when you talk to these guys, the billionaires that are lining up at your door waiting to buy teams, how much of it really is about just fun and how much of it is really about trying to make money?
Well, I think, you know, one time a guy was buying a team, an investor was buying a team, and he came to me and he says, I got to go home and talk to my wife, so I got to talk to you, make it work, okay? Because there's always, there is a vanity to sports, okay? And you know, believe me, if I become a billionaire, I'm buying a team, okay?
Which one?
I wouldn't say in this league. I have too many clients that get mad at me. But I buy every one of my clients' teams because they're great brands.
Randy, Morgan Stanley guy, you think about the world from a banker's perspective, looking at, you know, relative to the stock market, relative to the bonds, but teams themselves, I mean, where do we go now? Because they're getting so expensive that it's hard for one person to buy the whole thing. There's not that many Steve Ballmers out there who can buy something. So if you're going to have structures where there are 10 owners, 20 owners, all these partners, does it start looking much more just like you're a partner in a stock rather than I'm the real owner of a team and I can do something as opposed to just a lot of passive investors? Think about Jay-Z with the Brooklyn Nets. He couldn't really do anything. He just had a small stake. He wasn't a real true mover of the shares. So are we just moving in that direction closer to the Packers where there's no real owner and just a lot of shareholders?
Well, I think you're going to still have a lot of real owners and real people that have got type A personalities that are going to want to run these businesses and want to win. And at the end of the day, as a couple of people have said here, sports is about winning. It's about passion. It's about drive. It's about bringing home championships. And so I think you're still going to have a lot of people that want to be able to do that for their communities or the teams that they've felt very strongly about over the years. Now, I do think, Eric, you're right that you are going to get, as these businesses becoming more and more expensive, you are going to get a lot more diversified shareholder bases. And so that's where I think issues that are going to matter to individuals, such as governance, how you decide to run a particular business is going to very much matter. There are clearly a variety of teams. You look at in Boston, for example, where you would sort of say, we've got a couple of teams that are owned pretty much by individuals or families, and then you've also got a couple of teams that are run by groups of individuals that have been put together, and those groups I think have probably managed the Celtics and have managed the Red Sox in extraordinarily successful fashions. So I think that model is, I think, going to kind of carry on over a period of time. And I think the other area where I think it'll be fascinating to see what goes on in the markets over the next, call it 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years, is that just in the last couple of years, you have started to see entities such as Manchester United, Madison Square Garden, MSG Networks, Liberty Media has said that they're on the verge of spinning off the Atlanta Braves and looking to put that into a tracking stock. And for the first time, we are starting to see businesses that are valued as multiples of EBITDA, which is a lot better than valuing them as multiples of revenue, unless you're a tech guy. No offense there.
What's EBITDA?
We'll go through that at some point in time, but it's a very long expression. I can't explain either. I just make it up. But these businesses are being valued by EBITDA as a multiple of EBITDA, and they're being valued by institutional investors. And so, we think that's going to be a pretty interesting thing to see what goes on over the next 3, 4, 5 years, because as you get businesses that have got very strong operations, they may own real estate, they may own a variety of other things, you might find institutional investors increasingly having an interest to take a stake in those businesses and to follow those businesses, and we think that could be a real great growth vector in the sports space going forward.
I'll put this to George. How do you value a sports team? I know that's not the area that you guys are doing, is buying teams, but most of the money is media money, right? Most of the money is people like ESPN giving billions of dollars to leagues that then go down to teams like the Cubs, but then teams like the Cubs own a bunch of real estate. So what is it? Is it a media company? Is it a real estate company? How do you
It's hard
deal
to
with
say
that?
that it's not a media company, right? When you look at the rights fees that the NBA garners or the NFL has roughly $40 billion in media rights contracted. When you're in that business, you're in the media business. So I think predominantly media rights, obviously you have the live gate, and then you have these other ancillary revenue streams, sponsorship, licensing, concessions, maybe real estate. But at the end of the day, the franchise values are heavily tied to the national and the local value of the media rights. And when you think about the world as it becomes more fragmented, things that can engage people and things that connect to people live, have real value, not less value going forward.
Joe, you're smirking over there.
Well, because I love every statement he just said, because the Internal Revenue Service is challenging that sports is a media business. And there's these credits called Section 199 credits, which are manufacturing credits. And
Manufacturing credits?
yeah, so sports teams are allowed a special deduction if they're considered a media company. And there's big litigation. I think there's some 40 cases right now with the IRS on teams on this Section 199. And the IRS at the highest level has taken the position that sports business is media, and I'm going to take this tape and play it all day long.
I mean, you subtract the value of the media rights of the NFL. What's an NFL franchise worth? Very simply, not anywhere near what they're worth with the media rights. And so that is your number one greatest asset.
That's right. I couldn't agree more with George on this point too. And if you look at actually the last 20 years, you've seen almost an exponential curve of franchise value growth, and it's very closely tied to the way media rights have grown in the industry.
Jeff's out there in California hanging around Google and Facebook and Apple and all these guys trying to destroy traditional media. And at some point when that happens, who's paying these rights fees?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. The value of the media deals has exploded, partially because the only must-see live TV is sports. Everything else has gone. On the other hand, the worst of times, there are a number of trends that would make me really nervous if I was banking a future media revenue stream. One is people are cutting cords aggressively. Cable household penetration in 5 years has dropped 10 percentage points, 90 to below 80. So, people are unbundling their subscription. ESPN is losing tons of subscribers. I think it was 7 million subscribers last year they lost. TV ratings are way down. Millennials are not watching linear TV. My TV in my kids' rooms had not been turned on in 3 years. They are streaming everything, and they're streaming, and so it's the analogy to music. Instead of consuming CDs or consuming songs, instead of consuming channels, my kids are consuming shows, and they find the shows on multiple venues. Advertising is moving, video is going online at an astonishing rate. Snapchat and Facebook are two of the largest video sites online. Advertising dollars are moving from television, where the audiences are shrinking, to Facebook and Snapchat and others, where the audiences are growing. So that's a whole lot of disruption. And let me add one more, at least in collegiate athletics, which I have a firsthand knowledge of, the football fan is aging rapidly. Young people are not, millennials are not taking to sports consumption at the same level as they did years ago. That's a set of headwinds that could create, some decent instability. The NBA's ratings for their regular season games are off by like 30% in recent years. The next time that comes up for renewal, would you pay more for it?
I mean, I would say, I'll take the counter to that, which I actually don't disagree with anything Jeff's saying.
We only want disagreements. We only need one person to agree.
From a macro perspective, but I would actually say I'm personally very bullish on sports. Franchise
But you work
value.
there. If you weren't bullish, you wouldn't work there, right?
Well, that may be true, but the reality is that at the end of the day, while the ecosystem is going to change, to George's point, like the content ownership still rests with the club, so then it just becomes incumbent on the property to figure out where in the distribution channel they have to be to maximize their ability to monetize, right? So it may not be over the linear model. There's going to be disruption, but then it's about, where do we take our product, because the demand for the consumer and the fan to engage with compelling live sports is as high as it's ever been.
And I agree with that too, except I'd take you to the analogy of music and newspapers. The demand for music is still as high as it's ever been. It's probably higher than it's ever been. There's more consumption of it than it's ever been. There's a whole lot less income to artists from the recorded movie stream. Artists, recorded music is a non-interesting part of their P&L now, which is why they're, live has gotten so big and all the ancillary businesses they're trying to get into so big. The digitization of that business led to a lower yield on the product. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but it would be something that, we live in a world where things get disrupted really fast. My partner, Mark Andreessen, coined the phrase, software is eating the world. A lot of the stats I just threw at you is from a Barclays bank report that says software is eating TV, parentheses, and ESPN. So it's it's an interesting set of.
I could tease them. Who invited this guy? No one can.
I get that a lot.
It's very good. But it's hard to disagree that disruption's coming, right? And so what you're saying is the channels of distribution media are changing, and there are going to be winners and losers. And I think it remains to be seen what happens. I'm not sure the music industry is, apples for apples example.
I think that's fair.
650 million people tuned into Liverpool to play. 114 million people tuned into the Super Bowl a year ago in the midst of all this terrible drama. So I don't think the comparison to music necessarily applies to sports. But as the distribution channels become more efficient and the way that sports are consumed, things are going to change. There will be disruption, and how that all turns out, I think, is a very interesting question. At the same token, you might be able to, pay $5 to watch the Red Sox instead of being part of a cable opportunity. When you put on a virtual reality set and you're able to sit at center court at Wimbledon and share that experience with all your friends, what's that going to cost? And so the thing
Why
that
would
makes
anybody pay for a virtual reality experience?
I think it'd be pretty cool if you could put a. If
That'd
you
make
could
me
put,
pretty dizzy, though.
If you could put me on the Patriots sideline to watch the Patriots game, and I could share that experience with my friends, what would I pay for that?
You could pay extra to deflate the balls.
Yeah, that's right. But so
That's why they invited him.
Sorry.
So you don't know.
Am I in Boston?
It remains to be seen whether it's a net positive or a negative. And as well, these other technologies come out, right? You're also good. I love something, and I have all these new ways to share it with my friends and experience it, that is going to provide other value for people. The other thing that these other technologies are going to do is other niche sports now are going to be able to connect closer with their fan bases in a way that they couldn't otherwise. So I'll give you an example. We were looking at the America's Cup 2 years ago. Now, I used to think I'm a little old. Dennis Conner there going around in Newport, sailing. And I don't know if you see, now you have new really new, cool-looking sailboats, but also digitally, when you talk about the currents and the winds and all this other things, the experience of watching sailing through technology just got a lot more interesting, and the connection for those people that love sailing is a lot more today with the new world than it was in the old world. So I think it's unclear that how it'll outcome. I like the chances of sports. I think sports will be the most valuable piece of content out there for the future. Whether or not there's an adjustment in the ecosystem on the next few years and how that all plays out, I think is unclear. And that's what makes it exciting, and I hope that's why everybody's in the room today and at the conference, right?
All that tech, though, like if you can just do a VR headset and be on the field, why does anyone need to come to the games? TVs are getting so much better. The experience at home, all the screens you can do at home. How do you sell tickets to a Cubs game when they don't really have to show up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to truly replicate the social experience of actually an in-venue, especially when you're talking about like Wrigley Field, which is historic, unique. I mean, it's VR is going to be, I think, a really interesting to see how that shakes out. And I think it's tremendous, especially for those who can't get to the game, whether they're sort of geographically dislocated. But when it comes to actually sort of seeing a sporting event live, it's really hard to replicate that in the home. And I think for baseball, we're especially unique because we are in our case in Chicago, we're a warm weather sport in a cold weather market. So the idea of actually coming out, sitting in the bleachers, having some beers with your friends, like you can't replicate that in your living room.
But is there going to be an inequality between the teams with the big brands? So think about Cubs, Yankees, Red Sox, teams that just the whole country knows about. They can do all these real estate developments. They can apply that brand name and get people's attention, like the Dallas Cowboys did, like they're trying to do in LA. But if you're just a third-tier team, just people don't care as much about you, are they just going to disappear because they're not going to be able to compete with guys like you and all your historical advantages?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, though, is when you have a league structure, the league tries to actually sort of address that issue by whether it's competitive balance measures or revenue sharing to make sure that all the clubs can actually compete because, that's sort of a necessary thing for all the franchises to be successful. At the same time, there are inherent advantages of being a large market franchise asset, and that's why certain ownership groups will look to invest in those markets. So there's a little of both, I mean, is the answer.
Joe, tell me about the Devils. They're a large market team.
The New Jersey Devils?
Yeah.
Is that a large market?
In the area of New York City, right?
Well, when it comes to sports, and what I've seen over the years, I think you're looking at it's short in distance, but real long in value.
Because you're seeing a lot of these hockey teams, they're not with the national contract on TV, not there. They struggle to keep up with what you're seeing in football, baseball, and basketball, let's say. Because you see a lot of these deals.
I've seen a lot, and I've seen people in hockey, and I've seen people in deals in hockey, and I've used the term that grown men cry, and I've seen cash flush out of some of these hockey teams like I've never seen. But it's getting better. I think they're adjusting their model, and I think that they're going to get better and better.
What does that mean they're adjusting their model? From what to what?
I think it's more of a spectator sport than a broadcasting sport. I think it's less media than the other sports. And I think there's a big loyalty. This city's a big hockey team, and when the further south you go, it gets a little rougher.
And as the media channels change in the regional sports network model, and you're a third-tier team, what does it mean? He's right. That's where the change. Things aren't going to stay forever. If you believe, I'm not taking a personal position, but if you believe that the current model and the regional sports networks is inefficient, if you're in Boston and Chicago, you probably have a high-class problem. But if you're somewhere else, it may not be such a high-class problem, and it may be more a live event. And then you also have a competitive balance where certain markets have certain advantages over others, and what does that mean long term? And so that's, I think, another thing that you have to think about as these leagues progress, right?
I mean, there's an interesting, in Fanatics, Fanatics is online purchase of apparel. They believe something like half of all fans are geographically displaced. you're not living in where your fan is. I grew up in Philadelphia. I live in California. I'm an Eagles fan, and so it's hard to be an Eagles fan because they don't show the games. You can't find the merchandise. So I do think there's a remote, significant remote opportunity. And some of these new technologies that you're talking about, VR. I was a VR skeptic until you see some of the executions and some of the platforms that are coming in. And the experience is pretty remarkable. I mean, there are a lot of guys trying to replicate the stadium experience, specifically the stadium experience. And a couple of them, you feel like the things vibrating when the crowd's cheering, and it's pretty damn good.
Randy, working at Morgan Stanley, being on Wall Street, you've heard a lot of the rhetoric, especially during this election cycle. Similarly,
I haven't heard any of that.
Nothing?
Eric. I'm sorry about that. I may have missed that. Sorry.
New Hampshire's pretty close. Vermont's pretty close, right? Similarly, before I did the panel today, a lot of people said, you got to ask them about taxes, right? Why should...
Did people really say that?
Several people, yeah. Why should municipalities, states, the government, and whatever form be subsidizing teams, stadiums, whatever, when they're all owned by billionaires? Right? It's a very similar theme to bankers are getting paid too much, that kind of thing. But why should...
I've never heard that either.
Exactly.
I'm afraid
So,
to say it, right? Sorry, yeah.
what are your thoughts on that approach? Like, why should Joe Truck Driver be paying part of his taxes for anything that relates to sports?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that one, I think, Eric, that's going to change a fair amount. I think over the next 10 to 20 years, and I think that you're simply going to see less and less municipal funding that's going to take place for sports facilities. I think that's very clear. I think in the bigger markets right now that you're in, whether that's Boston, whether that's Chicago, the ability to sort of get substantial amounts of municipal funding just doesn't exist anymore. I think you guys have gotten some real estate entitlements and things of that nature, maybe a little bit of help, but that's kind of been about it.
Yeah,
I think for what you're doing.
Yeah,
in
we're
terms
fully sort of privately financed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's going to change. I think that what I think it sort of comes down to is that what importance does sports have in a particular community? And I clearly would argue that in some instances, sports it's the equivalent of the symphony, it's the equivalent of the opera. It kind of becomes the culture for the masses, if you will.
But you can't say symphony and opera, but a few minutes ago you talked about EBITDA. Like, those both can't be in the same paragraph, right?
Oh, they most certainly can be in the same paragraph, I think. I think that being able to provide that degree of culture and that degree of togetherness or collectiveness that takes place in sports these days, that matters to people. And the ability of an individual that might own a professional sports team to be able to monetize that, the need for that association within a community, people can make their own decision whether that's important or not. But I think bottom line, I think your point's well taken. You're not going to see nearly the amounts of tax-exempt funding or municipal funding that you've seen for sports facilities in the past. I think that's close to being over or substantially eliminated or reduced.
So now we've heard media money is close to being over. Municipal spending is close to being over. So what are we left with then? If national media, regional media, and the taxpayers are all going to cut back on spending, what does somebody like you do? You talk about private financing.
Yeah.
What are you left with?
Well, I mean, so I'm not sure that sort of media money is sort of going down. Maybe sort of again, sort of move in the sort of distribution chain, the value chain, but
It's not going to grow at the rates it has been growing.
I'll help you here. For 25 years, I've been asked about rights fees.
Yeah.
Right?
It'll be
for 25
different.
years. Yeah. And every year there's a bubble, they're overvalued. I used to go in, I can remember when I was at NASCAR, I was a young guy going in and I was telling Mr. France, listen, it's going to be tough this year, we're going to have a hard time. And he goes, George, because he's been saying that for 20 years, and that was 20 years ago. And for the last 25 years, the rights have gone like this. The last 5 years, rights have gone like this. So I think it's a little premature to say that the value of sports and media is anything else but very robust. And I was looking at the ratings yesterday on the NCAA last year. Ratings were up 30%. More people watched March Madness last year than in the last 22 years. So I think it's pretty premature to say that I think the media business in sports is strong until proven otherwise. Will there be changes? Yes. But I like the industry's chances there, right? And there's an argument to be made that it's going to go up, not go down. Even in terms of as it gets more fragmented, things that bring millions of people together are going to be more valuable, not less valuable.
And Eric, I was going to say, you asked the question correctly. I mean, what's going to happen when a lot of these subsidies aren't there anymore to a degree? And I think the response is that these are now real businesses. You know, I think I've been doing this for 20 years. I think back in the mid to late 90s, if you sort of looked at a traditional professional sports team, it would have been managed in a very, very mom and pop and really rudimentary fashion. And I think you sort of look in the audience today, you've got, I don't know what, 4,000 people here saying, you know, we like sports. There's a lot that we can do in sports to make money, to develop value. And I think that's really what's going to change in sports going forward, is that these are going to be real businesses. I think they're going to be increasingly, from my perspective, they're going to be increasingly valued as real companies. And I think you're increasingly going to find a diversity of investors, certainly retail, but increasingly institutional. They're going to pay attention to this asset class and like it.
The other thing I would say is that as you are unable to, I agree with Randy that sort of municipal finance is changing, right? Like you have that sort of populist undercurrent that you were talking about. And then you also have balance sheets, which are sort of a mess in a lot of places. But you end up with more sort of public-private partnership models where the club then is sort of trying to get their returns through like a real estate play, which is why you see your initial question was, you're seeing all these clubs in real estate. That's sort of the byproduct of what you're talking about, is that clubs are looking to the real estate plays sort of to enhance their returns.
Expand their brands.
And sort of expand their brands.
So then you'd think at some point, in the same way the analytics group in front offices has grown over the last 10 years, right? There was the original GM and his department, everyone there. Then you had these analytics guys coming in. Are you going to need these real estate guys? Are you going to have a whole real estate department? Oh, we're the Cubs, and these guys don't even touch the team. We're just working on deals outside the stadium.
Yeah, we have that, actually.
Right, and is that going to be across all these other teams now?
I think it's to be sort of team by team, but right now you probably have 15, 20 different clubs in the 120 or so North American sports teams actively pursuing a real estate investment. So, and in those situations, I would say the majority of those teams have a real estate specialist doing it, because you're putting significant capital to work, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I think we're there.
I mean, it's a well-run playbook. Early in my career, I was at Disney. Walt, when he did Disneyland in Anaheim, just bought the property for the park and didn't buy the surrounding area. So there was a couple issues with that. One is the surrounding area, he didn't capture the value from the surrounding area, and the experience provided by the people who own the surrounding area wasn't very additive to the park experience. So he took that and just went the exact opposite way in Orlando, where he bought up a huge amount of swamp land under a alias, Retlaw, Walter backwards, it was Retlaw Corp. And they controlled the entire experience, not just in the theme park. They have hotels, they have water park, restaurants, the whole thing. There was a whole lot more value creation in Orlando than there was in Anaheim.
I mean, look what the Cowboys are doing, which is absolutely incredible, that they're building a whole commercial development around their practice facility, right? And they're creating hundreds of millions of dollars of asset value that they've built in this complex, all around where the Dallas Cowboys practice.
The Giants have a referendum right now to do a large development contiguous.
Same thing. The Jets. 4 or 5 years ago, I went and looked at the Jets. They have their training facility. There's a residential development. There's a commercial development. There's a hotel. And so now they're not monetizing the stadium. They're monetizing where they practice. And so that's just an evolution, right?
And as back to the VR point, how do you compete? You compete by creating a sort of immersive experience for your fan from the second they sort of like come onto your property to when they leave. And if you can do the things like and control that experience like Disney has, you're able to sort of curate that experience in a different way that sort of differentiates you from just putting on a headset in your living room.
What about when real estate goes down? I mean, this question, anyone can answer this question. We've seen real estate go up, go down, go up, go down. So all of a sudden, if I'm the fan of a team and their side real estate projects have suffered, are they going to start waiving players that were really good, but now they're too expensive because they got to pay for some condo that none of the fans actually care about? I know nobody wanted to answer this question.
Look to
Yeah.
me for that one. Is that?
Well, he's an expert because they have all the real estate guys at the Cubs, so we'll defer to him.
Throwing him a
I mean,
bone.
I think again, it also goes back to sort of how you structure the investment. Like in our case, we have a separate real estate company, specifically for that reason, so that it's important that we're sort of recycling everything from the baseball club back into the team, right? We're sort of a closed loop system, and at the same time, you're looking for sort of other ways to grow value, right?
And I'm going to go to Joe with that same question. So when you've got your line of billionaires ready to buy the next team that comes available, are they talking about this type of stuff? Like, oh, I'm going to buy the team, and then I'm going to go buy a bunch of real estate with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to start building up development. Or are they focused just on the team?
We're actually working on a project, an international project right now, where real estate is a great incentive to be able to finance the team. There's so much real estate sometimes included in it. It's a very valuable. You're a brand, and that brand's and it has a loyalty brand. No one's more loyal than sports brands. I mean, people, die with sports brands on their coffins. So people are going to want to come to these places, and I don't think it's a normal real estate cycle. I think it's about the brand, and the brand will continue to bring the spectators to the facility and get the experience of what's being experienced in the sports industry.
It's also about building community. I mean, Randy mentioned this, right? But like in the end of the day, like we're community assets. Sports clubs are community assets. It's owned by an ownership group, but it's for the community. It's for the fans. And when you sort of are able to expand your footprint, and in our case, we're in a neighborhood, right? So we're building a community asset for the neighborhood. And so that's sort of another sort of element of this sort of development cycle, which is like when you have sort of corporate purpose. Like in our case, we have sort of three main goals, right? It's to win a World Series, to preserve Wrigley Field, and to be a good neighbor, right? And so we're trying to actually sort of enhance the community that we live in.
So if you can't win the World Series, then you go to Plan B and Plan C. Is that?
Well, no. To
that the
win the
goal?
World Series is first.
It's first, right? So you skip. If that doesn't work, then you focus
Well,
on the other ones.
there's three concurrent goals.
Randy, you mentioned institutional investors getting involved in teams. I hear institutional investors, I think about my 401k. I think about wherever they're putting their money in. Are you talking about I'm going to be invested in just some fund or whatever, and part of it is going to be involved in some Cubs investment or some team investment? Is that what we're talking about here when you say institutional?
Eric, it is, and I would say that we think that there is, some chance that kind of takes off. We think it's potentially one of the new vectors. I think the
Vectors.
yeah. So it's really sort of one of the new avenues that I think has the potential of taking off in finance for sports, and that is whether institutional investors, whether a Fidelity, for example, or whether a Franklin. Whether they see something in Madison Square Garden networks, or whether they see something if the Boston Red Sox or the Boston Celtics were to go public at some point in time, given the diverse assets that they have, or George Pine were to take his fund public, for example, are those going to be, or do institutional investors increasingly want to try to get sports-specific exposure? And I think the answer to that is yes, increasingly yes. And I think that's ultimately going to lead to sports assets potentially trading more along the lines of normal corporate assets. Are they going to be different in some instances? They sure are. I think, as Alex has said, you have, 120 of these in the country, or 122 of these in the country, so the scarcity value will always prop up the asset value. But our view is that that's got that could be one of the real new things that we see in sports finance over the next 10, 15 years.
Well, there's 120, let's say, big four franchises, but then Iron Man, for example, that's an asset. There's all these other, Major League Lacrosse, we have soccer, we've got, NASCAR, we've got all these other things that are just beyond that 120, and a lot of it is foreign money starting to come in. So I'll give this one to George, but where do we go here? Because 20 years ago, this was mostly a domestic supply and demand kind of sport, and now it's changing.
It's a fascinating in my little world. In the last 12 months, we've had two new players come in. I mean, Wanda has $65 billion. They bought Infront. They paid a very healthy price for Iron Man. And Providence Equity, they own Learfield. They own a company called Chime in the UK. Paid a premium for that. We have TPG and Silver Lake. So 12 months ago, half of that didn't exist. These are very sophisticated investors that have real demands on returns. Wanda probably with a little longer view, being from personal wealth from China. And you see, so there's more interest than ever in the business around sports because evidently people see there's a value proposition. We certainly see it at Bruin. So it's a very interesting and dynamic time. Yeah.
With all that foreign money coming in, though, do you think they're pushing valuations too high and out of the reach of where you pay?
Well, it's always an issue. And our approach is different. We have wealthy families. We want to empower great entrepreneurs to deploy capital. So our focus is less on price and bidding wars than more, hey, this is an opportunity to grow and build. And so we very rarely participate in auctions. And we're really going out trying to find proprietary deals with people we think is special. Because I think, to your point, that kind of capital deployed is not a place where they are going to push the valuations higher, and have, quite frankly.
Jeff, hearing all of this, does that make you want to invest more in sports or less in sports than you were a day ago?
I'm a sports nut. We invest specifically in sports technology companies. We invest solely in technology companies. So my focus is largely on sports technologies. I mean, I'm an investor in some of the funds Georgia mentioned, and they're really smart guys, so no question there. The hypothetical I'm throwing out is a long-term hypothetical. One of the interesting things in Silicon Valley is you kind of get people who are trying to reinvent the future all the time, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But when you sit in the chair, you kind of end up with a worldview that things are going to happen faster than a lot of the conventional wisdom thinks it's going to, and that there are tipping points and things along those lines. And this is one. The change in viewing, and the cord cutting, the unbundling, the millennial change in behavior is of large magnitudes and of note. And the TV business itself overall has been hammered, and then sports has been the lifeline. And so, at some point, if the patient dies, the game has to change.
But that provides opportunities too, right? So there'll be all kinds of over-the-top opportunities, right? And propping up everywhere, all kinds of new valuations. And so whenever the channels of distribution change in any business, there are going to be big winners and big losers. And what you're saying, which I would agree with, is what makes it fascinating is they're changing and there are going to be winners and losers. And some people are going to do really great, and unfortunately some people aren't, and that's why we're playing the game we're playing, right?
The report I was referencing, the Barclays report, said the losers are current networks. They're getting hammered. The audience is down. The winners could very well be Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu. Because a concept for Amazon is they're increasingly buying things to give away on the Prime bundle. They have the ability to cross-subsidize things in a major way. So competing with Amazon for a right, if they're willing to cross-subsidize, they have an unfair advantage. Netflix is something like 70, 80 million subscribing households now. It's huge. And so you've got existing incumbent, then you get the newcos that are coming in with a new approach. I mean, we live on disruption. So we're huge fans of it.
And if you look, think about what Fox was before it had the NFL. It wasn't very significant. And the question I have would be, who's going to be the Fox of that group?
Yep.
And is somebody going to say, you know what, I want to tap into something that draws 114 million people on a Sunday afternoon in February and taps in, draws a 25 or 30 rating. And by the way, Yahoo did this year. They put their toe in the water. So is there going to be a Rupert Murdoch of your generation or category? Will there be one, you think?
I actually absolutely think I think TV in 10 years is fundamentally different than
Couldn't Facebook or Google or an Amazon just decide, we have a lot more money than big media does, we will just pay for the rights fees, and every Cubs game is now streamed directly on your iPhone, and you don't see it on TV, or something like that. It's possible.
As a loss leader to build Fox, or as a loss leader to build something else, use your balance sheet and capital to build your business. That's why sports is valuable, right?
I mean, to the point, if sports is the glue holding everything together of that ecosystem, and when you're saying, networks are getting hammered, that just, I think, sort of demonstrates the value that someone's going to capture.
I've got my iPad here with a few minutes to go. These are the audience questions. And we've got about 10 questions, and I'll pick some of the interesting ones here. So the first one is, isn't owning a sports franchise a conservative investment? The Red Sox will be around forever, but Wang and Polaroid are gone.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
But I think if you're the
mean-
Red Sox or if you're the Cubs, I think that's true. But if you're, some of these teams like the Vancouver Grizzlies that just couldn't hack it in Vancouver, if you're, some of these other teams, it depends,
Well,
right?
I think location matters. Location matters. So I mean, owning the Chicago Cubs versus owning the Vancouver Grizzlies does matter a lot, but scarcity does matter. And I think it is fascinating. Obviously, we've got a lot of smart people in the audience. Go back and do a regression analysis as to what the S&P 500 has done over the last 25 or 30 years, and compare that to the valuation of the four major professional sports leagues. And I think what you will find is that owning professional sports actually gives you it's an uncorrelated asset. It actually gives you returns, or has the ability to kind of give you returns in bad markets. And I think you sort of see that, and I think that if you'll pick the right team and you'll run it well, these can be very, very good assets, very, very good investments. I think you look at the four major professional sports teams in Boston right now. They have been wonderful investments for all four of the major investors, and it's because they've run the teams well and they're in a great market.
Also depends on horizon, right? Like, so in Jeff's case, like, you may not get or even George's case, you may not get the return in the sort of the horizon that works for a purely sort of financially motivated sort of VC investor, but they're great long-term stable stores of value, and they tend to appreciate over time, and they can be tax efficient. So it's a really interesting asset class. I think it's the reason why you have all these people in the room who are sort of interested in sort of getting into the space.
What you said there makes me want to just go to Joe real quickly. When you see people who want to sell their teams and just get out, what's usually the driving factor for that? Is that the teams aren't performing well, or is it they personally are just struggling and they need to recoup some money?
Well, sometimes they're struggling because when teams that I do see being sold are people that have, where most of the wealth of the team that's his wealth as the team, and they got to monetize it. But you see the larger groups that being formed with 10 or 15 investors, that it's kind of more of a passive investment. They'll never sell. There's teams that we know that will never get out of a boardroom if they're ever sold, because the group would buy it from the other partners at will.
Which then it starts to look much more like a stock rather than just an individual owner, right? It gets to what Randy was
I
saying
think you're
about
going there. I think it's a great idea. When he was talking about the institutional investor I was thinking in my head, geez, I could really structure great tax benefits for the remaining investors.
And another,
because the institutions don't want it.
another avenue for sports ownership. I mean, look at Penske Corporation. What would Penske Corporation do if it wasn't involved in motorsports? That's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, really built off of the back of auto racing, right? And success on the racetrack. But that's another guy that used it as a platform. Because when you call up and say, I own the LA Clippers, it's different than calling up and say, hi, I'm George, right? So it's the owner of the LA Clippers calling, or the owner of the Boston Celtics. And look what Roger Penske built by his involvement in auto racing. He built a multi-billion-dollar business.
Do you think we're going to see more publicly traded sports teams, sports franchises come onto the market?
I think it will. I think it'll vary, or depend. I think we'll really want to sort of see how Manchester United and MSG and Liberty Braves really play out over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't think it will be for most teams, Eric, but I think there could be more than a handful of teams in large markets that end up having sort of multiple types of assets within their businesses. Those types of companies have a shot of being able to do something in the public equity markets.
And the big theme in the audience questions really relates to a lot of what we talked about. Is TV rights, the money there, and by extension franchise values reaching a bubble? With the rise in cord cutters, how concerned are teams about not capitalizing on TV revenue? What do you think the next NBA media deal might look like? Sports is the only live must-see TV left. Who's going to pay for it with all the disruptive media left, with all the disruptive media tech? Which sports are most prepared for the ongoing disruption in media? So, and then are team-owned RSNs a conflict of interest for sports leagues given the financial discrepancies they create? So most of the questions in the audience relate to the money coming from television, going into sports, propping up the value. So I feel like anyone could take those.
So I mean, just two examples of that. I know Joe Lacob, he plays in my basketball game. He bought the Warriors, and people thought he overpaid like crazy. He made a really,
At first, they really booed him. They thought it was terrible.
He made a really intelligent arbitrage against the TV contract. Steve Ballmer, in paying an eye-popping price for the Clippers, a lot of the value was predicated on his bad local TV deal expired, and he had a good product, so he could renegotiate it on top of the increase in the national deal. So, I mean, the value of the franchises do seem to be highly correlated with the entertainment money.
And the good news for the industry is the media companies have made long-term bets on sports, right or wrong, they have.
Yep.
And the leagues, all the leagues on their national deals are really tied in for a long period of time. So while all this disruption is going on, the major leagues here are going to have the ability to understand it, digest it, and figure out how to maximize it when their contracts are up, the most of which are in the next decade.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Typically, we're seeing this in San Francisco real estate right now. If you believe your asset is undervalued, you do a short-term deal. If you believe your asset might be overvalued, you do a long-term deal. Commercial real estate owners in San Francisco have started asking for 15-year leases of startup companies. It's just like, are you kidding me? So the fact that the leagues did these really long-term deals, do they believe their rights are
the hard
constantly
part,
escalating?
haven't been at a league. The hard part is coming in every 4 years, gouging a guy. After a while, it gets kind of old.
Yeah.
So,
So it's better to gouge him every decade.
If you can stretch it out a little bit, I think that makes for a better partnership. So to be fair, it's a fair point. But in fairness to the leagues and to the media partners, I think certainty and predictability, there's a real value to it. So I think when you look at it, all these issues will be resolved on the national level in the next decade. In the local markets, Houston and some other places, may be playing out a little sooner, and we'll have to see how all that unfolds.
There's a part of the question in there, the NFL channel and the NBA channel. There's an interesting strategy in there somewhere that I actually don't know what it is. So anyone, I'll play moderator a second. Anyone in the panel, what are they doing?
The NFL Network?
The NFL Network, yeah, and directly broadcasting their own TV games. Is that the beginning of the end of television, of sports?
I think those Thursday night games are so bad, though, I don't think that's the future.
I think
less of that is probably better.
I think the interesting one is the Jaguars and Bills on Yahoo.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Because they sold rights for a game that was 100% digital other than the local market. And you say, like, why would you do that? And to somebody's point, too, is if you're going to have to reach these new consumers, that's why it's coming, because to be relevant to that consumer set that you said you'd be concerned about, you have to be where those consumers are.
Agreed.
And so if you're a league or a brand, that's on your mind. You just can't sit there and say, I'm going to ignore this generation of people that are experiencing things on those devices. So, but I think Yahoo, that game, the Bills and the Jaguars, was an interesting step.
The only thing they missed is millennials aren't on Yahoo.
They're starting. It's one step at a time.
Exactly.
I mean, NBA TV, and other sort of league channels. I mean, those have actually been around for now a decent period of time. And I'll give, I just saw sort of Bob Bowman, who runs Major League Baseball Advanced Media back before we came out here, and I give him and the league a lot of credit. Where Major League Baseball is on the forefront with they've built this technology business that is a multi-billion-dollar entity, and is sort of viewed as like the market leader in actually sort of authenticated streaming technology. And so I think you will see some of these leagues sort of understand how they can evolve themselves and sort of try and get sort of closer to the consumer trend.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think at the very end of the day, I think the real challenge for these leagues is that they are really the creators and generators of content. And the question is going to be the way that they exploit and monetize that content today is going to be extreme, or 10 years from now is going to be, I think, completely different than it is today. The question is, are they going to be smart enough, and are they going to have the right resources to be able to get value when they do that? That's really going to be sort of the driving issue. I think it's what everybody in here is going to be able to participate in. Either through their employment or through watching, but that's really going to be, I think, the fundamental issue is whether these leagues and the teams are smart enough and whether they have the resources to figure out how to monetize their content 10 years from now.
About the leagues, one question that just got put on here, probably a Bernie Sanders voter. To what extent are returns to investments in sports franchises contingent on government protection of league monopolies?
I'd put it a couple of ways. I would say that, that yes and yes. or yes, I think that being able to have monopolistic or knowing that you've got a limited number of franchises and that for a particular sport, you may have a franchise or a monopoly in your market. Does that help provide value and generate value? It sure does. Does the way that professional sports is given some pretty favorable treatment in the tax code, which Joe can talk about, that drives enormous value. There's no question about that. So both of those are meaningful value drivers.
Joe, when you see this election coming up, there's another question here about what happens to valuations if the government starts changing the way they treat some of the taxes here. When you hear Ted Cruz say he's just going to get rid of the IRS, I mean, some of the stuff that people are talking about, do you look at this election and see, okay, what might happen to valuations, or is there just no relevance whatsoever?
Well, once I get by the idea that what's happening in these elections, we're sort of going to have a country at the end of it, some of this goes on. But, I've heard about flat taxes since I was 18 years old. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think there's incentives that are there for a reason. The question is, they're going to stop us from advertising a sports franchise. On October 22nd, 2004 was the day that they changed the rule for sports franchise. It used to not be subject to this 197 depreciation. And we used to get a heck of a tax shelter out of these things. And they modified it to give us a 15-year period. Will they take that away? It's a possibility. But right now, I haven't seen anything on the, anything on the counter. I probably won't see it on the counter. It's not going to generate that much revenue because it's not that big of a revenue ranger for the government. They're going to attack the hedge fund guys. Okay.
Hedge fund guys first, who then
First guys,
happen
yeah.
to also own a bunch of sports teams at the
That's
same time, right?
They're going to go after their pockets on the carried interest. They're not going to go after if they're doing anything. I know New York just is attacking that itself in the state level, but there's some interesting times.
Another question on here talks about career advice, skills and tools to acquire. Does everybody who wants to get into this business now need to either be a CPA or an MBA or a banker or a fund guy or a VC? Like what? It's so professionalized now, right? I mean, this is not at all what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty is that the industry has expanded so much over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, I think that the conversation that we're having today probably isn't had in the same way 15 years ago. It's the reason why this conference has expanded so much. And it allows folks to enter into the industry in many different ways. I mean, you look at the 5 people on this panel, we all have sort of very different backgrounds and approach.
Only one of you actually working for a team and everyone else still being involved.
Right, so the ways that you actually sort of get involved in the space are very broad. And it's a function of, okay, can you marry what your interest lies in with the opportunity set?
No, I think that's right, and I'd only add to say, talk about CPAs or MBAs or people that are in private equity or VC. What really generates a lot of sports value, though, is your ability to sell. So if you can sell tickets, if you can sell sponsorships, if you can sell brand value, that's what drives value. If you're good at selling, you'll do very well in sports. You'll do wonderfully in sports. Get good people skills. That's what I would say to you as well.
It's a great business. I've been in it for 25 years. I love it, love what I've done and what I do, and I'd encourage people to pursue it. And as you see today, I mean, whether it's investment banking or legal or accounting, it's a broad industry, and the values are only going up. It means the opportunities continue to expand.
Well, cool. Thank you guys for the time on the panel today. I think that's
Thank you.
all
Thank you.
our time. Appreciate it.
That was great.